So I want to know what's going on and what's happening in each department. I talk to my directors. I try to get them, to be a participative director. I'm like, everybody wants the director position, but they don't want the luggage that comes with it. And it's not just about staff, right? And it's not just about delivering care, even though that's why we're there. And that's the thing that I always have to stress to my staff. I said, just remember one thing: no patients, no job, and no margin, no mission.
Without supplies, there's no surgery. Without products, there's no patient care. Welcome to Power Supply, the healthcare supply chain podcast focused on helping you navigate the intricacies of logistics, purchasing, contracting, and supplier relationships. Each episode, we speak with healthcare executives, supply chain leaders, and innovative entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the loading dock to strategic sourcing, from buyers to the C-suite, and across the enterprise, we tackle the real-life issues impacting the healthcare supply chain. Whether you're tuning in for conversation or inspiration, we're glad you're here. You're just in time to hear it from the source and stock up on insight. So sit back and plug into Power Supply.
On this episode of Power Supply, we speak with Tim Ingram, founder at 6060 Consultancy LLC. And Garry, we're going to be talking about making the case to the C-suite, because so much of what we do in supply chain really equates to what I would consider to be soft savings or soft dollar savings. And a lot of times we put in these initiatives and they're not going to see the results until afterwards, their projections. And so building trust with the C-suite is really not always easy to accomplish, but you've got to be able to talk their language. And that's something that we're going to be discussing today with Tim.
Yeah, Justin, we got to have a seat at the table with the CFO. Even now, even more impactful, if we're not there, we got to be there. And how do you tackle that and really be able to speak the jargon? Soft dollars, cost avoidance, waterfall savings. What does it all mean? I'm interested to see how Tim takes it and how the podcast moves in the direction it's going to move. So looking forward to today's podcast.
All right, we'll be right back with Tim. Stay with us.
I'm Hayes Walder.
This is Gary Skinner.
And I'm Justin Poulin.
A production of 17 Studios. You're listening to Power Supply.
We are speaking with Tim Ingram, founder at 6060 Consultancy LLC. And Tim, I believe by the time this episode airs, you will have participated in the very first ever Power Supply virtual conference hosted and sponsored by Paradigm, among many others that got involved in the event. So I want to thank you for supporting that and sharing your insights. And we didn't necessarily dive as deep into this conversation around tackling the soft dollar challenge with the C-suite, which this is one of those conversations that I think really doesn't just apply to supply chain. It can apply to so many different departments. So if we have people representing other areas of the hospital listening to this show, I think they'll get a pretty broad kind of benefit from this conversation. So thanks so much for coming on, Tim.
No, thanks for inviting me. I really am excited to be here.
Hey, Tim, I couldn't help but notice. I mean, it seems like, are you from New Jersey, New York, Boston? Where are you from?
Tennessee.
I love it.
It's funny is that my dad was in the Air Force for 26 years, and we moved all over the place. And I was born in East Tennessee, but we moved to Southern California, lived there for 10 years, moved back, which was probably one of the biggest disappointments, of all the kids, or 7 of us, moving from Southern California, where you're riding skateboards and have long hair and shorts and T-shirts all the time, and then coming to Bristol, Virginia, with the only skateboard in school. So, the funny story, I'm riding my skateboard down the sidewalks into school, and there's somebody behind me going, young man, and I just kept going. And so I go in there and I do a tail kick and throw it in the locker, and here comes the vice principal, and he goes, "Didn't you hear me calling you?" And I said, "You were yelling for me?" And he goes, "Yeah, I was saying young man." I said, "Oh, I'm Tim, And so I went to the principal's office. You're not supposed to ride your skateboards on the side, but you see bicycles all the time. So he takes me in there, and our principal's last name is Outlaw. Now, who has a cooler name than that, right? So he goes, "I'll take care of it." And he shut the door, and he goes, "Hey, man, let me look at your board." And this guy was from Portland, Oregon. He met his wife, who was from Bristol, Virginia, came back to Bristol, ended up being the principal of the high school. And he was sitting there doing tail kicks and all this stuff in front of me. And he goes, "Oh, I miss this so much." And I'm looking at him going, "Who are you?" And he explained to me how he got there. So it kind of made things comfortable for me. But, I used to have long hair past my shoulders, all in a ponytail. People would say they're a little funny. "Hey, there's Tammy" instead of Timmy, So it was all good, But I played all the sports. So, as soon as you get into those little cliques, everything's fine. And everybody wants to know, "Hey, can you teach me how to ride a skateboard?" And so I did. So that's how I got my fit into the cliques. I fit into everybody's cliques. I wasn't partial to any. I was out on the smoking court. I didn't smoke, but my friends were out there. So I went out there, the rockers, they call them high rents, low rents, you name it. They had all kinds of names, that I had to deal with. And here's a guy from California I go home, I look at my parents, I go, "What did you do?" He brought me to these people. They're like 50 years behind California, but it ended up being a pretty good, 4 years, and all that. So it wasn't too bad. And that's where I joined the Air Force, went into supply chain management and healthcare in 1979, retired in 2002. My first job was working for Cardinal Distribution in pharmaceuticals. Then from there, I went over to Blue Ridge Healthcare, which was part of the Carolina Health System. And that sort of started my career from then. And I moved around the United States to different facilities and different sizes, all in supply chain. It's kind of all, it was a good trip, good experiences, learned a lot of things, and then one of the things that, you have to learn coming out of the military is you have to account for what money you spend, and you can't buy $500 hammers because nobody's going to understand that. But I learned how finance and materials management had this symbiotic, relationship. But I saw over the years, guys, and correct me if I'm wrong, I see us separating finance and materials management going in opposite directions. And that concerned me because supply chain has their hands in everybody's business, right? It didn't matter where you worked. We supported everybody. So we sort of knew everybody. We knew how everything is connected, how everybody had their own roles in healthcare. So you started learning a lot more about how everything is connected, the dots. I used to use a training tool. I'd get marbles and I'd throw them on the ground, and my staff would look at it and go, "What's that?" And I said, everything in there represents a department in healthcare. And that's what it looks like right now. Nobody knows which marble is which. And it's up to us to connect them all and make it make sense in the way we support healthcare.
What I love about that analogy, Tim, is that it's literally not bricks where you can stack them. You can't take the marbles and stack them or order them in any way because they'll just fall back down. They don't have.
I'm going to use that, Justin. That's a good part of. That's a good attachment to that analogy. But
you can call them Justin's marbles. Just call them Justin's marbles.
Hey, I'm always losing my marbles trying to put them back together. So no wonder I get this metaphor.
Exactly.
You stole my words right there.
Yeah,
I did that preemptively, Hayes. I know how your brain works.
I was going to say someone else on this podcast had lost their marbles, but unfortunately, I'll leave it up to you to figure out who I might be talking about.
Well, using analogies like that always makes the story clearer. When you try to explain to people why we do what we do and how we do it. We don't like to see nurses come down upset. We don't like seeing doctors come down and be upset. And we certainly don't want the C-suite calling us, because I used to tell people when I would look at my phone when it would ring and it would be some director's name, they're not there to call me and say, "Have a good day." It's usually they're upset about something. And that's the nature of our job, right?
That's the way supply chain is.
It
If you're
is.
not getting calls, you're doing a great job. If you're getting calls, you're putting out fires.
Exactly. And I think fire extinguishing has been more prominent lately than it ever has. And it might be because we're losing a lot of talent in supply chain. We're definitely not, I think Justin said it, we're not a destination career. And that's tough because you want to find people with the same commitment that you have. And I'd like to tell everybody that it's an 8-hour job, but it's not. It's always going to be more than 8 hours. It's always going to require us to work weekends, extended hours during the week, because healthcare is open 24/7, 365. So supply chain has to be available at the same time that the care is being provided. And sometimes bad things happen on good days. So we have to address that.
You know, you talked about the C-suite, and I do feel like now more than ever, supply chain has the ear of the C-suite, but it doesn't change the bottom line reality that supply chain is a cost center and not a revenue generating center. And that's not going to change, or it's not going to change much. And so I think one of the real struggles for people, and that's really the reason that we're having you on the show today, is every time you want to invest money, you know, you're tasked with this ROI. And we know that we already have such limited data that showing ROI on those investments is very, very difficult. And so it seems like a lot of times it's like you go and you try to push something forward and you have some data, but the minute you get challenged, maybe the conversation is like, well, just trust me. This intuitively makes sense. And it might be intuitive that it should work, but that doesn't necessarily mean that somebody is going to cut a check for an improvement that you want to bring in to streamline or build efficiencies or reduce costs that are in the supply chain, especially when costs are rising. And I feel like sometimes people just get caught chasing their tail on this. And I think, you know, I'm really interested to kind of, you know, as we tee up this conversation around how to position soft dollar savings and how to bring that forward, like, how come hospitals or the health systems themselves are the only ones that aren't making any money? And that was something you posed to me when we first got connected. And you said, here, this is the question I ask, is everybody that's involved in healthcare, how come it's the health systems that don't make money?
Well, you know, it can be a debatable, and it's certainly never an all statement, because there are health systems out there that are making money, right? The one thing they have that none of the other ones have is they have a process, and they have processes in place, and they monitor it, and they educate their staff, and everybody's involved. If you ever go, and I'm not going to mention any hospital specifically, you know who I'm talking about, everybody's on the same page when it comes to operational cost and what that means to each manager, each director. Where I find in other hospital systems that I've been attached to for one reason or another, they never understood. They didn't even know what non-for-profit meant. They said, well, that means we're not making a profit. I'm like, no, that's not the right answer. We're supposed to make a profit just like everybody else. And I've always said we should operate as a for-profit, but treat as a non-for-profit, because there's a lot of benefits to the patient population for non-for-profits. They have a lot more flexibility in the kind of care that they deliver. Charity care, free care, those kind of things are always on the table. But when you talk about soft dollars, Justin, it's those dollars that the CFO doesn't, what we would call cost avoidance. He can't feel it, he can't see it. But I'm sitting there going, when you have installed a responsible and an accountable supply chain operations, we're there to avoid spending dollars unnecessarily. And that means we got to have our hands in everybody's business. So who are the biggest contributors to the spend? You know, you got the OR, you got the cath lab, you got IR, you know, and, you know, then the specialty units. You know, Med-Surg, although they're the busiest, are not the big spenders of money. But we spend too much time managing their PARs. And so I've always a proponent of putting supply chain presence in the OR, the cath lab. That's where we should manage it. That's where the biggest opportunities are to reduce operational costs, but they see it as a one-time savings, reduce the inventory. What does that do for me? I'm like, well, it's easier for my staff to manage a $200,000 inventory versus a $400,000, but you're reducing our value. So when you reduce inventory value, the value of the company is reduced $200,000. And CFOs and IDNs don't like that. They don't like to see that disparity. Wait a minute, what are you doing? I'm like, well, if you look at our spend, and if you look at our patient population, our CMI, all those things that a lot of supply chain people don't get involved with. If we have a CMI, let's say, of 110, that just means we don't get a lot of sick people, but we spend it as though we're in the 120s, 130s. So why is that? Why is ICU going through so many gloves? Well, they double glove, triple glove. Does the director even know that? Well, I didn't know they were doing that, Tim. And I said, well, that's why I'm here. Not to judge, not to make you do anything, because really I don't have the authority to tell any one department how to treat patients. But I can tell them where their spend lies. And if a CFO is having one-on-ones with the directors, asking them about their supply expense, and they're not able to answer the questions, I told them that's not a good position to have with your CFO, that you don't even know where your spend is going. So we're going to have these conversations before you have those, and then you're going to be able to sit down intelligently and informed. This is where I spend my money. This is why. In March, we did this. We had a CMI of 120, but in April, it was 110. They didn't even understand how that correlates with spend. Sicker the patients, the more consumables you go through. We did a study on utilization one time on O2 sensors. We averaged 10 per adjusted patient day. And that's out in big time. The benchmark is 4. And so we wanted to do reverse engineering this. We say, why are we going through 10 O2 sensors per adjusted patient day? Well, when they start to the entry point, which is the ER, and the time they end up to the med-surg ward, they opened up their personal patient bag, and there was 8 O2 sensors in the bag. No one ever checked to see if there was one in there, and then they just kept applying new O2 sensors. So we changed the standard of care. We got it down to 6, which equaled about $300,000 a year in cost reduction. And we're just talking about utilization management, because I'm not into going in and taking products from people that are what they're comfortable with. I'm in with utilizing the products that we have in a more intelligent fashion and knowing why we do what we do. And when we started doing that, I was at this one hospital for 7 years, and I asked them, what do you think is the number of items that we changed in the 7 years that I have been there and running the value analysis committee? And they would say 400, 500. I said, no, it was 189 items. That's nothing. It really isn't a lot of items to be changing. I said, what we did to achieve $21 million in supply expense reduction was we started looking at how we use the supplies, and are we doing it in the most efficient manner, right? Of course, there's some contracts that went out there that contributed to this, but everything was like that. But CFOs are not impressed with that, because they see that, okay, what are you going to do for me now? What are you going to do? What's going to happen next?
You brought it back circle to the CFO, and I'm thinking about them, thinking about budgets, thinking about capital expense, thinking about purchase services, not just the OR, IR, cath lab. Those are our big dogs. But I get down to the facilities world. You get down to laundry and linen. People think laundry and linen. Some of those are million and millions of dollar contracts. Do you think it's just difficult for CFOs to go, how do I budget soft dollars? How do I put this in a whole nother category? Do you think they just go, this is scrambles? I need waterfall savings for 3 years on a service agreement or a term. Do you think that's just hard to sell soft dollars? Because I totally get your inventory management and the SKUs and get it off the shelf and rotate it. But just at that level, that's just not, is that a control level, a CFO level, or is it the complete C-suite budgets? What are your thoughts? How do you sell that?
Well, I'm going to use that same hospital. I don't know if you remember MD Byline back in the day, right? Well, I used to work for them. Well, before I did, I brought in their services for managing our purchase services. we reduced our annual spend in purchase services by about $4.5 million just by them reviewing the contracts, renegotiating contracts. What was going on was the department directors were re-signing the agreements with an average of 5% CPI adjustment every year, every time it was renewed. They just kept renewing it, signing it. They weren't negotiating. They just signed it because, well, we got to have this. I'm like, guys, turn the services over to supply chain. We're the professionals. We're the SMEs. We know how to do this stuff. But getting back to your original question, though, is I think the real root problem is we don't have enough experienced, mature, exposed directors in the right chair that know how to sell the data to the C-suite.
How do you do that? Like, I think you're right about that, but you talked about talent leaving the industry, right? And, you know, I borrowed that destination career phrase from Derek Gallagher and Rachel Anderson, who have been guests on this show as well. And we talked about that, but how do you position that then? How do we get the C-suite to see, you know, those efficiencies in a different light? I mean, I think partly the stress on the healthcare system and negative operating margins is helping us, but that doesn't make it any more informed, or it doesn't mean that just because we're saying the same thing we've always said, that all of a sudden it'll make sense to them. They might agree to do something because they know they have to do something, but that doesn't mean that they necessarily understand it. So how do we break down that silo and talk the C-level language when we're trying to position this?
Well, I think this goes back to the breaking down the silos and trying to combine data with marketing data. We purchased a marketing data tool that allowed me to see what other hospitals were purchasing and buying individual products for. Where did we belong in that market? Most of our prices were 75 percentile or higher. So that in itself sold the data that we weren't getting what we would call a very competitive price across the board, right? So let me tell you, this wasn't an overnight thing. So I started tracking all the doctors, their time, their pieces and parts, DRG reimbursements, the average time per procedure. And this is a supply chain guy doing this because nobody else was willing to do it. IT was willing to support me. So I was really excited. I said, wow, you know, supply chain is really making a turn here. I'm demonstrating how we can use data to demonstrate that we have a lot of room for improvement in how we negotiate contracts with vendors. So we had 17 spine vendors, 15 orthopedics vendors, and several of the other types, and all the surgeons thought that their vendor was the best vendor, you know. And I have some orthopedic friends that used to tell me, Tim, it's all good. It's all good stuff. It's just that this is what I was trained on. This is what I feel comfortable with. Do you want me putting Stryker in you when I'm only comfortable with DePuy? I said, I want you to have what you feel more comfortable with, but I need you to sit on my side of the table when we discuss these prices with the vendor. And that's what started really everything happening, was when the surgeons got involved and those vendors, we came out with a construct agreement. And I presented it to them, and I said, I showed them all the signatures of the doctors and surgeons. Your surgeons have already agreed to this. You have to agree to these prices if you want to be able to provide products in our hospital. Well, a couple of them, you can imagine who they were, decided we're not going to play. Okay. So one of my vendors in the spine went from $400,000 in spend with us up to $2.5 million. So guess who all of a sudden wanted to play? You know, the ones that didn't want to, you know, agree to those prices. But it's gotta be data driven. Surgeons are very intelligent people. They know how to separate fact from fiction. They asked me the hard question, where'd you get your data? We told them, we got it out of our system. These are the things that are being recorded every day. And here's where the silos come in, right? We can't see that unless we install a process in place that allows us to see it. I started seeing the block times. I started seeing what surgeries are being done each day, and the ones that were projected out. I could bring our custom packs down. I dropped the OR inventory from 1.9 million to 365,000, and we never borrowed anything from another hospital. And those are embarrassing to me because we're not managing our stuff. We're asking other hospitals to support us. And then the nurses were scared. We actually had to have a meeting with the CEO, and they were saying, well, the nurses are concerned. And I said, listen, I'm sorry. What did you run out of? Because I need to make sure that something's wrong. Well, we haven't ran out of anything. And then my CFO Neil goes, then why are we here? Well, we're just concerned. He looks at me and goes, Tim, thank you for the information. We got it. And basically, he's telling them, you're worried about something that didn't even happen. We were having problems 2 years ago before Tim got here. And then now that he's got here and fixed it, you're upset that it's working. I put a buyer and 2 technicians in there out of pocket. I did not increase my FTEs, which makes everybody happy, right? But here's a department that spends 60% of my spend, and we had nobody in there representing supply chain.
So you took the risk a little bit. You attributed the resources, took the risk, got the savings. But here's what happens, right? And I'm interested to get your take on this. That then means that you got the savings. That doesn't always mean that you get to reallocate those resources. You just got the savings and they hit their number, and maybe they're not a negative operating margin anymore. Maybe they're breaking even, but you don't necessarily get to say, this is working. Give me 2 FTEs out of the money I just saved you so that I can go do a similar project, but in this way over here. So I want to button this up a little bit because we are getting close to the end. We got about 5 minutes left in the interview, but I want to button this up a little bit because I do think that to maintain that momentum of those wins, you can only reattribute your resources so far before to continue to do something transformational like that, where you actually do need to add some bodies to the equation. Now, once you've proven ROI, you ought to be able to make that case to the C-level and say, this is my next project now that I've earned your trust. And everything is trust. Now that I've earned your trust, can I take some of this money and add some FTEs and start doing my next project? And what should that next project look like? So how do you always have to have your next project to win that battle of trying to reappropriate some of those savings?
Leadership does have amnesia, about where we are at that time. Unfortunately, the hospital was bought out by a bigger system. Even though they liked the projects, they liked the success we had, they didn't have what they called directors on their sites. They had what they called site managers. So, and basically I was being paid as much as the VP of supply chain. So I was let go, not because of performance, but because
pay structure.
They didn't want to have a director.
Yeah, org structure, exactly. Honestly, right? They just, you were priced above the position that they had filled. This is part of the reason that these hospitals lose the talent, though, right? Is the minute somebody is leading something strategically like that, you might go through a reorg. But let me ask that question a different way, though. So you bring them savings like you just talked about. What was it? 1 point what down to 1.8 million? Is that what you said?
Well, 1.9 down to 365,000.
Okay, so significant savings. I mean, to ask for 2 FTEs, even at 50 or 60,000 a pop, is a drop in the bucket based on what you just accomplished. When you go show them that savings from getting the utilization right and having that data access, when you go show them the savings, do you have to tell them what you want your next project to be and what you need to do it? Because you said they might have amnesia. Do you have to be ready to ask for the next thing when you go in and show the results? Like you can't be like, I got that win and now I'm going to sit back for a little bit and start looking for the next win. You have to be looking for the next win at the same time you're claiming victory, right?
Sure. Well, I'm the type, though, is I don't want to ever sit and just hit cruise control, right? There's always opportunities to be more efficient. But I'm going to tell you, Justin, I wasn't in it to increase my manpower, to be honest with you. I wanted to demonstrate to them is that we don't need to decrease our manpower, that allowing us to manage this more efficiently and having supply chains hand in more of the operational piece of these revenue generators, the upside's going to be not only a reduced operating cost, but we also had better revenue charging because one of the questions I used to ask finance, how do you know we're charging what is chargeable and that we're being reimbursed for what we charged for? And the answer is always, we don't. We don't know. I said, well, that's not a good answer, and I'm not being critical, but I have to demonstrate every penny. I have to be accountable for every cent in which supply chain uses. And every year when I'm setting my budget from zero, explaining why I need this much money for the hospital to spend. What are my CPIs? What is the GPO forecasting on cost of product increases? Doing all that, giving those numbers to the comptroller. Why is it that on the health delivery side, are we not as accountable for the dollars and pennies that we have? And I think because way back in the 70s, when they reduced supply chain by almost 60% and turned those services over to the clinical staff, right? They would be ordering their supplies, the nurse servers. Remember all that waste that was going on back then? They thought that they could do it. And actually what ends up happening is you have technicians that are asked to do supply chain and do their primary job, which their primary job comes first, and supply chain gets neglected. And so you see this buildup of supply expense going up because supply chain is not staffed to monitor everybody's budget. You know, we certainly can answer questions about why something costs what it costs, and that's the contract price. You know, well, can you get a better price? I can always ask. But you know how that works. But see, it turns into, well, what can you do for them, Tim? How can you bring down their budget? And I'm like, well, one, let me take over their supply expense back. Let my staff manage it for them. And I can guarantee you a 30 to 40% reduction. Well, how do you come up with that number? And I'm like, because this is what I do. You know, if I was a surgeon, how do you know you can put a TK in today? Well, because I do it all the time. Well, I do supply expense management every day. I'm tracking it every single day. My staff used to get not mad at me, but wondering how I did. I'd walk in there and go, hey, what happened to that one item? Why did the price jump? They go, you already know about that? And I said, that's what I do. This is me. This is what supply chain professionals are supposed to do. I have my finger on the pulse, not on the checkbook. You know, so I want to know what's going on and what's happening in each department. I talk to my directors. I try to get them, you know, to be a participative director. I'm like, everybody wants the director position, but they don't want the luggage that comes with it. And it's not just about staff, right? And it's not just about delivering care, even though that's why we're there. And that's the thing that I always have to stress to my staff. I should just remember one thing: no patients, no job. Yeah. And no margin, no mission. But we're still expected to meet those mission, vision, and values that they set down for us all the time. It's a dichotomy of conflicting goals going on every day.
I love that statement. So, everybody wants to be a director but they don't want the baggage that comes with it. It makes me think, and every single one of us on this call, everybody wants to be their own boss until they have to deal with the baggage of being a business owner.
Oh yeah.
And it sounds great, right? It sounds great. I get to decide everything I do every day, right? And you also have to be the one that makes sure that everything gets done every day.
Yeah. We did this podcast last night, and I told my wife, she goes, how'd it go? I said, well, really well. She goes, well, what'd you think of it? I said, well, one thing it demonstrated to me was I have a lot to learn before I even think about setting my own podcast. You know, because Justin and Aaron and all these guys they've done it time and time again. I'm like, I said, Justin's over there going, okay, this is what we're going to do. And he would say something to the technician, okay, you know, go straight over to Tim once I'm done with this. And I'm sitting there going, oh my gosh, I don't know jack about podcasts.
Yeah. I mean, so Hays, I've mentored lots of successful people on podcasting like Hays.
Yes, you have. Yes,
That's an inside joke.
Of course. Mentee.
Tim, this was a great interview.
Well, I want to get involved that way, guys, because, you know, I'm not getting any younger. I love enjoying sharing my experiences, and I certainly don't know everything, and I haven't been in all different types of healthcare delivery systems, but you know, population health is a big issue, and telemedicine, and I know we're going to get involved in all that stuff. We don't want retail to take traditional healthcare to school teach us how to do our jobs, that's embarrassing. Supply chain, same way. We have to be more progressive and creative, all those things that we used to do years ago when we were young and people allowed us to be that way. But now it seems like we're sort of being held back and saying, oh, the OR or, oh, the cath lab's not, the pharmacy has all the flexibility because they have so many regulations, backing them up, right? Supply chain doesn't have that. I'm surprised at how many people in my hospital know how to tell me how to do my job. That's the thing. I went into a friend of mine's radiology and said, hey, I'm in here to get an MRI. And he goes, oh, do you have an appointment? I said, no, I don't have an appointment. He goes, well, why are you here? Because I decided I wanted an MRI. He goes, well, it doesn't work that way. I said, that's right. And it doesn't work like that in my department either. We have processes. You have to fill out forms. I need to know who the vendor is. Are they contracted? And they're just like, oh my gosh, Tim. I said, but see, you're not supposed to worry about that. That's my issue. I've been doing this for 44 years. I know all of it. I can hear somebody walking down the hallway and I wait a minute. Well, what did you just say, Justin? No, that's not the way our process works. Let me check on that. That experience and maturity and exposure is missing in supply chain. We're hiring very young leaders, and it's not that I'm opposed to not hiring them. We're putting them in the decision-making, I have the last word seat. And I think we're setting ourselves up for a lot of, you get somebody out there who's been around beaches, right? And all of a sudden he's going, hey, anybody notice that the water's going out into the sea? And they're like, oh, really? And everybody comes to the beach. But guys like me, I'm running in the opposite direction. They go, where are you going? A tsunami's coming. And who knew that, that COVID was going to be that tsunami? Everybody just stared at it for a bit. And when I heard in December that there was even a potential, I'm like, okay, guys, let's do this. Let's increase our PPE by 30%. Let's get our stuff in here before everybody starts rushing to the store and buying up everything we have. And they go, really? The CFO even told me not to. He said, no, don't do that now. And I went, okay. So I went back to my office and I still did it anyways. I didn't have time to sit here and decipher to him 44 years of experience that this is not going away. This is going to hit us hard, and PPE's where we're going to get hit hard at. I'm down at respiratory therapy, and I'm asking him, what kind of supplies you need if this kind of thing was to happen? Well, she went through her inventory list. I bumped up everything 30%. And, even though we were a small rural hospital, we never ran out of supplies. But that's what I'm supposed to do. It's not to brag, but that's what supply chain people do. We have to protect the hospital against themselves. I said, don't let money be the reason we can't be prepared.
That's great, Tim. We're out of time, but this was a great interview. I mean, I think that trying to get that ear of the C-suite, I don't know that I would advocate everybody going against the CFO, depending on their position, right? You better be ready to back that up if you're going to do that. But at the same time, it is your job to have the foresight. It is your job to explain 44 years of experience or 5 or whatever you have to the C-level to the best of your ability to make the decisions, for the organization that are going to help them,
and know when to call your peers, right?
Right.
And that's the thing. I have a lot of connections, a lot of friends that do the same thing I do. And I don't hesitate one bit to call and say, hey, have you ever used this product, or have you ever heard of it? And no, never. And that's the thing about supply chain. There's plenty of connections and networking out there. LinkedIn is a great spot for me. You could imagine I got almost 10,000 connections, and probably 60% of it is supply chain folks. And we're not shy to share information, and we're certainly not shy to maybe even go after and say, wait a minute, what are you talking about? And I'm one of those guys. I'm not afraid to speak my mind, and I'm not too proud to be told that I was wrong either. That's how you learn. Whenever you reach a point you think you can't be taught anymore, you should probably go ahead and retire, because this profession doesn't wait for anybody.
All right, Tim. Great job.
Right.
Great job today. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks, Hays. I appreciate it.
All right, everybody. That was Tim Ingram, founder at 6060 Consultancy LLC in Hays. We talked a lot about how do we have this conversation with the C-suite that really the efficiencies, the utilization, until you've actually accomplished it, it's a soft savings. It's cost avoidance, as he said. And, right now, there's a lot of attention on supply chain from the C-level, but how do we maintain that? And then how do we take this additional attention that we get and make use of it to really make changes in the organization and to continue to promote those types of initiatives? I don't know if we got the perfect answer on should you go in, with what your next project is, but I got to say, Hayes, I think that's the best way to do it. Like, know what you're doing next and capitalize when you're in front of the C-level to continue building on the trust when you're able to show results from the hard work that you put in, not only as an individual, whether you're director or otherwise, or if you're on the front lines and you're making a difference every single day.
Well, you're going to get that second project if you show up and do the first one well, as kind of he described. And he does a great job of outlining how that works. But you do need good data. You do need a couple FTEs. You need some, data crunching. But he did a really good job doing that. I enjoyed him a lot.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's going to do it for this show. But the best way to listen to Power Supply is to download our smartphone app for iPhone and Android. There you will get bonus content. It's the best way to listen to the show. If you're already listening to podcasts, though, you certainly can find us on Apple, Amazon, or Google Podcasts. We're also on Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and really all of the podcast applications. Just simply search for Power Supply and like and subscribe. We do want your feedback. So if there's a particular show that you thought was really helpful, or a guest, or maybe you've got some ideas for future topics and guests for the show, we'd love to hear from you. Just send an email to info@powersupplymedia.net. And on behalf of Hayes, Garry, and myself, thanks for listening to this episode of Power Supply.